What is the most creepy thing you've ever seen, even though you're very skeptical about paranormal things? I was about 10 years old when my friend went to say hello to his mom, who was working as a barmaid in one of the local pubs. The pub was built in 1461, so it has a good amount of history. After saying hello to his mother, we went to leave and noticed the cellar door was open. Being curious 10-year-olds, and out of earshot of any adults, we decided to sneak down and have a cheeky look around. When we got down there, it was kind of how you would expect. Just loads of barrels of booze and storage for other bits and pieces. But suddenly, we hear this, "Excuse me," from behind us. We spin around, and there's a lady in the cellar. She says to us, "You shouldn't be down here," and we should go back upstairs quickly. We do as we're told, and as we're exiting the cellar, we're caught red-handed by the landlord of the pub, who asks us what we were doing in the cellar. We explained we just wanted to see what was down there, but that the lady told us to go back upstairs. He looked a little confused by this and asked, "What lady?" before venturing down into the cellar himself. A few minutes passed, and when he came back, he told us there was nobody down there, and to stop messing around. At which point, we left the building to go and do other things. The thing I remember, though, is the lady was dressed in an old-timey maid's outfit that you would see in a British Victorian period drama. I also remember she didn't feel threatening or scary, but rather kind and gentle. I messaged my friend about this a few weeks ago, 26 years later, and he remembered it clearly. I've heard several people talk about a maid or servant who was pushed down or fell down the cellar stairs and broke her neck. So in conclusion, it was either the ghost of a Victorian servant, or the landlord was doing kinky stuff with someone in the cellar, and we arrived at a very inconvenient time. When I was a kid, we had a rocking chair in my room that was super comfortable. I needed it in my room because I regularly had extremely bad night terrors, and my parents would have to come and calm me down by rocking me to sleep in it. This got to the point where it happened every night, and my parents clearly got very tired from it, even though they said it was alright. One night I woke up, presumably from a night terror, and instead of my parents being by my bed, this old woman who I've never seen, very slightly glowed a soft green, was sitting in the rocking chair and rocking it. She was dressed in the very typical grandmother attire, and specifically had a jade bead necklace. She gestured for me to join her, and while I was still a kid who literally just woke from a night terror, I wasn't afraid of her at all. I joined her, and she rocked the chair and hummed for a while. I'm deaf, but I could feel the vibrations of the hum. And eventually I went back into my bed, and she pulled the covers over me. She kept appearing every night for quite a while, and it was the same routine every time. Although she would be wearing different clothes, she would always wear the jade necklace. Eventually, my night terrors subsided, so I only sometimes saw the woman. Looking back, I realize how weird it must have been for my parents, because I was at one point waking them every night because of the night terrors. Then suddenly, one night, I stopped needing them at all. So one night, my parents come in when I was in the middle of walking over to the rocking chair with the old woman. They asked what I was doing, and when I looked back at the rocking chair, there was no one there. She appeared a couple times following that, but for the most part, my night terrors completely stopped. So she stopped showing up. Fast forward to when I was 18, and my parents were showing me old photos of my family. Then I spotted a photo which had the rocking chair. I was shocked to see that the old woman was in the photograph on the rocking chair. It turns out the rocking chair was from my grandmother's grandmother, who was the woman in the photo. But what freaked me out was when I was told that she always wore this necklace of jade beads, and would usually be found in the rocking chair, and reportedly was very motherly. While I don't generally believe in the supernatural, I can't deny the fact that there was no way I could have seen her before and imagined her exactly as she looked, including the details about her jade necklace. I'm one of those guys who likes to explore abandoned places for fun. I'd normally go with someone else, but this particular time I went alone to an abandoned children's hospital near where I live. It was in the process of being demolished, and most of it was already gone. Only 3 parts of the original building were still standing. Anyway, I entered the largest building, 2 stories, each made up of a long hallway with rooms off to the sides. The windows were blocked off, so it was dark inside. I was kind of apprehensive about going in, especially since I was alone, but I thought since I'm already here, I might as well. Not much happened until I got to one of the last rooms on the top story hallway. I went in and just felt like I needed to get the fuck out of there, fast. No real reason behind the feeling, I just knew something wasn't right. I walk out and head down the hallway when I hear this noise. It sounded like a machine whirring, with some kind of voice mixed in there, making a groaning sound. It stopped, then started, then stopped, then started with regular intervals. It was coming from the room I was just in, the one that didn't feel quite right. Needless to say, I was shitting myself with fear. I legged it down the hallway and out of the building. Weirdest shit I've ever experienced. I was going to visit my grandfather's grave when I was in my mid-20s. My grandfather was buried in a really old graveyard, where the oldest graves were in the center, like before Civil War times. It was really out in the boonies, so it's like middle of nowhere with an old church type of graveyard. Anyway, you have to walk the graveyard, and my grandfather is buried way in the back. So I hike up and say a few things, and then I enjoy the quiet for a while. After that, I start back down and detour a bit to look at some of the old grave markers. There is one particular huge gravestone in the exact center, just massive compared to the others. It looks like a giant cut of rock was stood on its end, and the markings were simply chiseled in. It also is the only grave marking with an old iron fence around the plot, so it's really overgrown in comparison to the well-maintained plots. So I amble over and look at this, and I try to read it, but the grass is really blocking the dates. So I lean over the fence to brush it aside, and I look for the details. And just as I read the year 1790, something rattles right next to my ear. Immediately I think rattlesnake and jerk up, and as I do, something pushed me back down hard. I actually skidded back about 3 feet and landed on my butt. I kind of freak out a bit looking around and trying to figure out what the hell happened. I looked down at the base of the grave trying to see if I saw a snake or something, and then I blinked because something was wrong. I couldn't figure it out at first. Then I sorta shuddered and really looked. There was something causing the air to blur in front of me when I looked at the grave, but it had edges so everything was clear around it. I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat, and I scooted my butt so fast I hit my tailbone on a gravestone. I jumped up and ran half down the hill to the bridge to the parking lot, and stopped right when I got to it to calm down a bit. And then I turned around and looked up, and I saw the air blur moving down the hill between the stones toward me. It was vaguely human-shaped. I could literally see the movement as details went blurry and refocused as it moved. It wasn't fast, but it was coming. That did it. I tore ass across the bridge, jumped in my car, and burned rubber out of the lot. It's been nearly 20-something years since that time, and even typing this has got me jittery. Just thinking about seeing the world blurred without any reason to it, and it's moving towards you? Christ. My aunt has a story of her and her siblings sharing the exact same experience while in 3 separate rooms. My aunt and I were driving in the town she went to school in. We drove past a house and I remarked how bad it looked. She replied, "It's way worse on the inside. That place is haunted." I had never heard my aunt talk of anything paranormal, and I haven't since. The story goes that the 3 of them rented out some sketchy house while going to school. Apparently strange things would happen that made them feel uncomfortable, but never crazy. They would all notice on a few occasions that they would wake up in the middle of the night with the blankets off and at the foot of the bed. Nothing strange, people kick blankets off when they get too hot all the time. One night though, my aunt recounts that she had a dream she was falling and needed to grab onto something to save herself. She suddenly realized that she wasn't dreaming and she was being pulled by her ankles out of the bed. She grabbed the rails of the headboard and after a few horrifying moments, she gets the strength to scream. At the exact same time, she hears screams from all of her siblings' rooms. Just as soon as it started, the feeling ended, and she ran to check on them. They all had the exact same feeling of being pulled out of their bed. Needless to say, they moved out and never looked back. My roommate lost her cat. There's an old empty house next to where we live, also owned by our landlord, and we were allowed to use the space for parties, etc., so we were very familiar with the house and all of its rooms. It's about 1 a.m. and she's freaking out about the cat, so I propose to help. We thought perhaps the cat might be in the house next door, so we go in there with a flashlight. My friend tells me she thought she heard meowing coming from the house earlier, so we keep looking. We get to the hallway, and there's a ladder in the middle, leading up to an attic, and the door of the attic was just a hole in the ceiling of the hallway. Now, I had been on a crusade in this house many times, and seen all of the rooms, but I had never seen an attic. So this was really weird. Now listen, normally I'm intrigued by these things, and I'd be like, oh, an attic, let's go up there, adventure. But no. My stomach was churning. Never ever had this ladder been down. Nobody even knew there was an attic there, and we know there weren't squatters, since the house was in the backyard of the place we lived in. I had a very bad feeling, because that ladder looked so inviting. Almost too inviting? I told my friend that her cat probably wasn't up there, and we should go. We walk back, and she tells me, you know, I really thought I heard meowing up there before. But we both chickened out and just went back. We walk out of the door back to our place, and guess who's sitting at the front door? Her cat. Ever since, weird things are happening to me. Mostly at the parking lot attached to the garden of the house. At first, I thought I saw a black figure walking by one day, but brushed it off. A few days later, I was walking in the parking lot, and all of a sudden I hear someone breathing on my neck. I thought it was one of my roommates trying to scare me, but nobody was there. When I was 14, I was going to the bathroom at night. As I was walking down, my brother walked behind me. He also needed to pee. He let me go first. I left the door ajar so I could talk to my brother. I was always scared in that house, and so was he. So we kinda just talked a lot to let each other know we weren't alone. Suddenly, my brother went silent. I felt really cold. I saw a person walk past the door, but it wasn't a human. It was a shadow, like so black. It was the absence of light. It was tall, it had a mass to it, and it felt like it sucked the warmth out of the air. Even though it was tall as fuck, it made no sound. It was almost as if it made silence and sucked the sound away. I waited a bit to catch my breath because I was so scared. Then I slowly opened the door to see my brother. He was pale as a sheet, shaking, and felt cold to the touch. I asked him, "What did you see?" He said, "Get out. We need to go now." We ran back upstairs and hid under our blankets until morning. We never talked about it again. 20 years later, I asked my brother, but he claims he doesn't remember. I don't believe in ghosts. I never saw anything else, but I'll never forget that experience. My grandmother had a story about dreaming of a woman with long black hair strangling her. When she woke up, she was holding several long black hairs, but no one in the house had hair past their chin, and none of it was black. I had one where I was camping on a college class trip, and we were in an empty New England campground in the late fall. It was all very Blair Witch and creepy, but the night ended up being uneventful. We were getting ready to go the next morning, and I ran to the bathroom while the van was being loaded. I was in a stall and someone came in and got into the stall next to me. I was tired and a bit irritated because there were a bunch of open stalls, and I don't really like people in the one right next to me. So when I finished, I glanced under the door to see whose shoes they were, since we were literally the only people on the site, and there wasn't a damn thing there. I had heard the door, the footsteps, and the lock of the stall door rattling into place, but there was nobody else in the room next to me. I hightailed it out of there, and got the hell on the van. Scared me all the more with it being a sunny morning without an ounce of creepy to prime me to hear things. I live in an apartment complex, and a few months ago, our neighbor stopped my boyfriend and I outside. We typically have a quick chat with him here and there, but this time he looked concerned, and he asked us if we had been experiencing anything weird going on in our apartment. I asked what he meant by weird, and he paused and said, "You know, paranormal." My boyfriend and I looked at each other, so confused, and thought this man was crazy. At first, we brushed it off, but then our neighbor sent us videos he had from the cameras he put up in his apartment. Every night, he would catch orbs, doors closing, objects moving, even voices. During Christmas time, his tree was knocked over, and apparently, in the video, you see a huge-ass orb right before. The most recent story he told us was that when he was taking a nap, he woke up to someone coughing in his ear. Apparently, he even had ghost hunter people come to check it out, and they caught a voice on tape, and whatever it is where they detect heat or something. Ever since that conversation, we've been experiencing weird things in our apartment too. The past few weeks, I've been waking up to or walking into our bedroom to the TV being on and playing I Love Lucy. At first, I thought it might be my cat stepping on the remote, but it's a smart TV, and when you turn it on, you have to click on an app to go through a process to put a show on. So it's odd that I Love Lucy gets put on each time. We bought Sage, but are too scared to use it. We live in apartments that used to be a senior living home, so our theory is someone must have passed in the apartment below us. The state we live in doesn't have to disclose deaths to renters, only home buyers. Now I have trouble sleeping at night, knowing the apartment below us has a spirit friend. Super creepy. And my boyfriend and I plan to move soon anyways. I guess our neighbor isn't even fazed by it anymore, and finds it cool. When I was 13 and in the Boy Scouts, my troop took a weekend trip to the USS Lexington, wherein you stay overnight on the ship, eat in the mess hall, explore the ship, etc. As you work your way through an aircraft carrier, you go through all kinds of crazy compartments, very steep stairs, hatches, etc. On one tour, we were going down to the ship's engine room, which required us to climb down steep stairs one at a time. I went first, and when I got to the bottom, I noticed a blonde young man in an old crew outfit, kneeling down, working on something. He noticed me, stood up, and looked at me with bright blue eyes. He nodded, then walked into an adjacent doorway out of my view. When the rest of my group got down, we walked over to the doorway the guy had gone through, and found it was the ship's barber shop. I was shocked to see there was no man in the room, and there were no other doors to leave the room through than the one he went in. I told my friends, but they didn't believe me. Later on that night, there were several activities to choose from, with one of them being a ghost story session of the ship. The Lexington was damaged in naval battles several times, either by torpedoes or kamikazes. In one story, they told of a torpedo smashed into a section of the engine room, killing many of the crew members. A commonly seen ghost was a blonde sailor with bright blue eyes. I was coming home to my parents' house around 11 p.m. on a Saturday night. I just wanted to take a bath and go to sleep. My parents were out at a bar and the house was dark. There's obviously nobody home, so I got the house to myself. Score. As I walked up to the front door, I heard whispers and quiet giggling from around the side of the house. It sounded like my sister and her friend trying to freak me out. So I loudly said, "Ha ha, very funny, Kiki." No response. I looked around and saw that her car wasn't anywhere in sight. That's the point where I called my boyfriend to stay on the phone with me until I got inside. Got inside fine and turned on just about every light in the house. Went upstairs to shake that off and take a bath. Heard some quiet snoring/shuffling from my parents' room and assumed my mom had stayed home. Super relieved to not be alone in the house anymore, I turned most of the lights off again, had my bath, and crawled into bed. By this time, it's about 1 a.m., and I hear somebody walk in the door. Then, their footsteps suddenly stop. 30 seconds later, I get a text from my sister. "Sister, is that you?" Me. "I'm upstairs, so no." Sister. "I just heard your voice call my name from the living room." Me. "Wait, are you serious? I thought I heard your voice laughing from outside earlier." At this point, she runs up the stairs and asks if she can stay in my room for the night. No complaints from me. Oh, and about 30 minutes later, both my parents came back home. Fuck knows what I was hearing from their room. That house still freaks me out. I was about 12. Me and my friends went to this ski resort type place. Anyways, we sleep there for a weekend and we actually had a real blast. The first night, everyone crashed early because of a long day of skiing. That night, at about 1 a.m., I hear running down the halls. I assumed that it was a kid because there were lots of them there, but it never stopped. About half an hour of running with no breaks, I decided to get up and tell the person to knock it off. I opened the door to nothing. This creepy hallway that was coincidentally not well lit was completely empty. The hallway was dead quiet until out of nowhere I hear loud-ass footsteps running towards me. So I shut the door and proceed to hide in my bed the rest of the night. The next day, nobody believed me. And that night, the same thing. Everyone went to sleep. I stayed up and waited for the running. And it actually never came. So I was about to sleep, and before I did, I went to go pee. I look out the window, and about 50 feet away, I see a little girl. Now, for context, this girl was about 6 or 7 years old, in a dress and regular shoes. It was negative 33 degrees Celsius outside. The path she was standing on was barely lit, and the entire place further in the distance was all forest. I freaked the F out, piss at the speed of light, and then hide in my bed until morning. It still sticks with me 6 years later. Okay, there's a story my mom hates to tell because it scares her that much. I already forgot a lot of it because it's been a long time since the last time she told me the full story. She always says she doesn't want to speak about it. I don't usually believe in someone being possessed, but my mom seriously gets scared every time she tells this story, so I somewhat believe her. Honestly, I already have goosebumps just writing about it. There was a man in our village that apparently got possessed by his own dead father. One night, he went out drinking. At around 3 a.m., he went home, and on his way home, he started to break every window he saw. He also walked through the cemetery. Anyways, when he got to my grandmother's house and started to do the same, breaking the windows, my grandmother, my uncle and his wife, and my mom came outside. They knew him, and they knew he was drunk, so they started to talk to him. His hands were bloody because of the broken glass, and his voice was growly and low. They tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having any of it. Once my mom got closer to speak to him, he told her to back off in his normal voice. He apparently said that because she was pregnant with me at the time, and somehow my mom being pregnant was able to bring him out of it. My mom fainted because she got weak out of nowhere after he told her to back off. And then his voice got growly and deep again. When my mom woke up, she saw him literally crawling a palm tree my grandmother had in the garden. She said he was crawling the tall tree extremely fast and looked like an animal crawling on all fours, instead of using mostly his arms like normal humans do while climbing. I don't remember what happened next, but when the sun rose, he began speaking normally again, and apparently all of his wounds from the broken windows were healed. He didn't even have a single scar. And he didn't remember a thing. He then went to a priest who told him he had to do certain things to get rid of his father's spirit. If I remember correctly, he had to walk through the cemetery for a couple of days, at a certain hour every time. My father used to work in rural areas for farmers and villagers, and there was this particular road between two villages that was infamous for ghost sightings and hauntings. One day while working, the chief of one of the villages advised my dad to not take that road. Take the road that he usually comes from. The infamous road was a shortcut and had a shorter path. My dad was skeptical about these things and he didn't believe. He insisted that he just take the shorter road. The chief said, "Okay, but if you vanish into thin air, tell me who to contact so I can let them know you're never going to be seen again. Just because you didn't want to travel 30 minutes more." My dad said he's willing to take the risk and that if anything happens to him, no one's to be blamed. He used to travel on a Yamaha RX 100, and between the two villages there was a forest with an infamous road. My father was ready for the trip of a lifetime. When leaving, he was warned not to stop anywhere for anyone, anyhow, whatsoever, and that if he sees anything, just push the throttle to maximum. Thankfully, he actually agreed, but here's where the action starts. He was riding on his bike at 30 kilometers per hour with his high beams on, and that's when he saw two guys dressed in all white with a body wrapped up in white cloth laying beside them. They were asking for a lift to take that body with them to the nearest medical center. Both the villages didn't actually have a medical center. All they had was a little clinic, which actually shut down due to the doctor's health. My dad initially wanted to stop to help them, but he quickly remembered not to stop for anything at all, and as directed, he dropped a gear and burned the rubber to get out of there. Guess what happened? One of the people jumped in the middle of the road to spook him, but instead of being spooked, my dad just went through them, as if they were thin air. When he saw in the mirror there was no one there, and not even the body of the person laying down. My dad went into a state of shock when he realized what had happened. He made a call as soon as he reached the other village, where they were informed that he was going to come from the shorter, infamous road, and they were ready to investigate if he didn't make it. Thankfully, though, he did, and then he narrated the whole story to the other chief of the original village. He gave the background that those two who tried to stop you once had an accident while trying to stop other vehicles to reach the other village, and since then they've been there. Anyone who stops to help goes missing, never to be found again. To date, 14 people have gone missing, but my dad lived to tell the tale. I would have been no more than 13 when this happened. I was visiting my home country with my family for my aunt's wedding. Now mind you that we were all staying in my childhood home, which was known to be haunted. A lot of other things that make my blood run cold to this day happened here throughout the time I lived there, but that's a whole nother story. So I was 13, as I mentioned, and I was an easily frightened child. Darkness was not my friend, and the house itself gave me the creeps, even in the daylight. We were all sleeping in the big hall when the power outage woke me up. I was drowsy with sleep and extremely agitated because of the heat. It was a brutal summer. My Nana suggested that I go sleep in the room upstairs with the big window. It was one of the cooler rooms in the house, and it was where my aunts used to sleep. Now I have absolutely no idea how I even agreed to that, because it was pitch black, and I don't like wandering that house alone, let alone in the dark. But I guess I was just too sleepy to care, because I made the trip to the room all on my own in the pitch blackness. So I get there, and I see that my aunt, the bride, is already asleep on the floor, and the other one is on the bed. So I take a pillow and lay down on the ground beside her, the bride. In the next few moments, whenever I'd close my eyes, I'd feel something in front of my face, like, I don't know, a cloud of darkness, and it would disappear whenever I opened my eyes. This went on for a few long moments, and I dozed off pretty quickly after that, paying that creepy situation no mind at all. When I woke up, a very faint blue light from the sky illuminated the room. It was still very dark, save for that blue light, and I unconsciously turned my head to the left and saw a dark figure kneeling beside me. Let me tell you guys, it was freaky as fuck. I damn near pissed my pants. It was so tall, like so damn tall, and it sat so close to me like one would sit on a prayer mat on their knees. From what I can remember, it seemed to be wearing some sort of long black cloth over its head that covered the rest of its body, and the eyes were white. White as fuck. My voice literally forsook me, and then I screamed. So hard. I thought I was gonna tear my voice box. I grabbed at my aunt that laid clueless beside me and hugged her, shoving my head into her neck. Everyone gathered into the room, and I told them what I'd seen. My grandma and mom said a prayer for me, and the rest of them were just freaked out. Needless to say, I was not allowed to enter that room after that.